This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and today I am speaking with author Erin Steele. Erin is the author of Sunrise Over Half-Built Houses, which we will be talking about today. She also writes on Being Human on Substack. She was a 2022 Writing by Writers Fellow and is published in Human Parts, WordWorks, and other online publications. She lives in Kelowna, BC, Canada, and I'm happy to have her here today. Welcome, Erin.
Awesome, Rebecca. Thanks so much for having me.
So I just want to let everybody know, full transparency, that last fall your publicist reached out to me and asked if I wanted to read your book. And as soon as I read what it was about, I said, absolutely, sign me up for this. And so I want to thank your publicist for the copy. I really enjoyed it. It's a memoir. And for those who have yet to read it, could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think the most simple way to describe it or categorize it, I suppose, would be an addictions memoir and a queer coming of age memoir. You know, I think if I were to get a little bit deeper, I think it's about, fulfillment. I think it's about, the pursuit, seeking fulfillment externally. So kind of the external pursuit and, how that can manifest in some pretty intense ways. I think it does read like fiction. It's quite like it's written obviously in the first person because it's a memoir, but also present tense for the most part throughout, which really gives it sort of that immersive feel. Yeah, that's basically that.
So can you tell us how you came to have that title? Because it was so funny when I got the book and saw the title, I thought, well, that's really an interesting title. And then when I got to the section where you state the title, I loved it. And I loved it so much that I ended up putting it in my online review on Instagram. I put that quote because it's just so beautiful. How in the world did you come up with that title or those words?
I think those words, that is the big question of artists, right? Where does it all come from? The words came first. And for people who haven't read that, it's a section, there's a lot of metaphor in the book. And it's this section where I speak about, trying to, me or the narrator, I suppose, in the book, is really just trying to explain, what addiction means to her. And it's, uses this train metaphor. And it's like being on a train and you're looking out the windows and, you see all these beautiful things. And one of those beautiful things is, the sun rising over half-built houses. Then you see more, jarring things like a crow with a broken neck. And you see, beautiful wildflowers. And so, as a writer and the craft of it, I'm sort of building that juxtaposition. And the idea at the end of that small section is that you stay on the train even though the less beautiful things appear more regular because you start to get used to it. So that's that section. And so I will tell you the title. That is a tough journey coming up with a title. And, that was among many of them. But aside from, depicting that beauty that I think in the book, even when things get so tough and difficult, there are these moments of beauty. And sometimes it might just be the tiniest little thing amidst, a lot of tough darkness, but there is always that beauty there. So I think the reason I have that title is it's the sunrise over half-built houses. It's an anchoring of the beauty as well as sort of just noting that the half-built nature of, life in general, but also, the character's journey. It's nothing is ever complete until, it is over with life.
Yeah. And there's always sort of ugliness within beauty. That's human existence, right? So, and I will say, you bringing that up, I hadn't thought of it this way, but you're right, because your book could have been a really hard slog through the downside, the bad part of addiction, but it really does. Yeah, I just realized like how beautiful the book is, and it's not something that's going to be hard to read. You know what I'm saying? It's just, like you said, it has that beauty within the story, and it does kind of read like fiction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that is like, I mean, that was something I was just so cognizant of while writing it, and I know that there are parts that are hard to read, and it for people for sure, but I really, I am so deeply of the opinion that nothing is ever 100% wonderful or 100% horrible. Like it just that's not life. And so even when things are 100% horrible, there are these, even if beauty might, I mean, can be defined in a lot of different ways, but even, little moments of humanity or connection or things that are there, because my experience is that they were always there. And I really wanted to get that across in the book. So I'm happy that that did come across for you.
So, when you were coming out of your addiction, was that the thing that kind of pushed you forward, is being able to see that beauty in even the smallest moments of the worst parts of it, I guess?
Yes, although, I would have to define beauty, I think, in this case as hope, and I think I describe it in the book as it was like this little tiny speck of light. And like that's what it was. I mean, that's of course what made it so hard, because that's a tiny little star in you know a lot of darkness. But yeah, I mean, call it beauty, call it hope, but that is absolutely, what helped me move in that direction for sure. And then of course, as time goes on, it's like if you stare at a patch of the night sky for a certain period of time, you're going to start seeing more and more stars. And that's sort of what happened. It's like time goes on, you're able to zoom out from the pain of the now when things are so hard with, coming out of drug addiction, and you start to see things from a widened scope, and there's always beauty there to behold. Yeah.
Wow. Now, when you were writing the book, were you concerned that it might trigger you at all? Or are you far enough past it? How does that feel, that process?
Like, do you mean triggered as in like could start using again triggered, or?
Yeah, even that, or just, I guess, even the emotional triggering, not just the addiction triggering, but like both in a way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. This is something that I've mulled over because, ask me 2 years ago, maybe more, I would have said, well, no, it's okay. Like I like dealt with it all in my journals at the time. And this was a literary endeavor, which it was. And as far as like, triggered, like I'm at the point in my life where I know, in the depths of my being that there's nothing that could happen that would make me turn back to using drugs. I simply know that about myself. But yeah, I think I did underestimate the emotional trigger sense of it, because I worked on this book for a long time, like nearly a decade basically. And I would, write, and then I would just be like, oh, just feeling like not myself or not good. I'm like, so it was kind of like later on, and really probably within the last like year or two, where I was like, okay, you know what? I think I've actually have been just like emotionally triggering myself because it's so vivid, and because I really was dedicated to just like full immersion. How do I get back into those moments and write them in a way that is, believable and visceral? Like, of course it's going to take that toll. And yeah, it did for sure. At the same time, I've there's also enough space because, I did a lot of the, cathartic thing with, my journaling at the time or after, or, the space between the active addiction and today. So I definitely have a lot of emotional space between me and, the character of me. But yeah, definitely. I mean, not easy. It wasn't easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, within the time period of the memoir, from the outside looking in, it seemed like your life looks almost ideal in the way that you describe your family life, et cetera. I mean, in terms of where you live, et cetera. And I just wondered if you could talk about the pressure of that perception of others that you're living the best life you could live, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's a big important theme in the book, of this idea of how things look on the outside versus how they feel or are on the inside. And that's also a very central struggle of the character too, who's like, so much of the journey is like, oh my gosh, I feel this way on the inside, but I feel like I'm not able to be myself on the inside and the outside. And like that is a really like huge motivating factor of what gets, her, me, whatever, to turn to drugs, to turn to all of these tools, because really like her major driving force is she wants her insides to match her outsides. And the reason I think that it's such a big theme that also it, transcends just the character's experience, the setting in suburbia where it's, everything is prim and proper and, really like beautiful looking. I think that it's a very relatable theme. And I think, the pressure of it is that that's the kind of stuff when we put expectations, on ourselves, people around us, society, to be a certain way that is, you know, different from reality. It's that expectation and reality uh, dissonance, I guess. Then that creates shame. That creates challenges in talking about things that could really use air to help everybody involved. And I think it takes things that could be even more, solved on wider community and societal levels and pushes them inside individual humans. And that creates feelings of loneliness and isolation. And that's, when we talk about stigma around addiction, I think that's a lot of that stigma that people can see on the outside and perpetuate inside themselves. And yeah, I think that can be really damaging. And I think it's goes for a lot of different things. I mean, who doesn't? I mean, I can't say that. Even today, where I consider myself living a healthy life. Even today, if I'm having a really bad day, I sometimes struggle to reach out to a friend and say, "Hey, I'm having a really bad day. Like, want to talk it through with me?" So there's that, and I think it's not just to do with addiction. I think it can be isolating for people. And you see this on an extreme level with a character who's, surrounded by people kind of much of the time, if not all the time, and still feeling this deep sense of loneliness and otherness, and yeah, not able to express herself or believing that that's true for her.
Yeah, and I think, and this is a good thing, I think I hope we're getting past this idea that any kind of addiction is a weakness, right? And that
Yeah.
there are so many layers to why people, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food, whatever, that there are issues there. And I love that phrase, you know how they say when you see someone you don't know what they're going through. And that is, I love that phrase because for the first time, I feel like we're humanizing every single person to be able to say you don't know. On the outside it may look great, but you really don't know what they're going through, right?
So much, exactly that. And I think that's just so important to be a human in society about, where let's not put assumptions on each other, and then that creates a welcoming environment all around us for people, and it empowers people to be who they are and get rid of that shame, whatever that may be, or whatever degree it may exist on.
How much do you I'm curious, and I'm not even sure how I'm asking this question, but how much do you think coming out and recognizing your queer life, what you wanted, what you had suppressed and what you wanted, how much did that feed into your addiction? Was that like a big piece of that because you were hiding who you were really?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it fed into it a lot, not in a conscious way, but I was hiding who I was, and it was confusing that, I don't really understand the word lesbian, or I don't really like, it's not a so-called normal route. You don't grow up in school, realizing that there are these different ways of being. All you see is, I mean, this is kind of that inside outside thing. All you see is, well, you get a crush on a boy, and then you end up, eventually, getting married and having kids and a family and this and that. And then so then that when there's that, like, again, dissonance between what you think is so-called normal versus how, in my case, how I felt inside. I'm like, well, I don't really care about boys, you know, I'm like, okay, I have these boyfriends, like
Mhm.
have 4 boyfriends at one time because I don't really want a boyfriend, but I think I should, but I don't really know, you know, and so there was a lot of that. And I don't think it was, you know, a conscious thing, because I think even as I went along, you know, even those, you know, so-called feelings for girls, you know, as we see in the book, come out in really challenging, messed up ways in hindsight. But yeah, I think you know, those feelings for me were shrouded in shame. You know, they were shrouded in shame, and drugs and alcohol and all of that stuff made me feel better.
Yeah. Uh, Now, this is I know this is kind of a weird question, but I have family and friends who have been through addiction, and I've this is a personal question from me, but was there anything anyone could have said to you back then that could have shortened or changed your path to sobriety, or did their help, and I put help in quotes because sometimes we think we're helping. Did any of that help, or would it make it worse? Could it have made it worse?
Yeah, that's such a big and interesting question, and I've definitely mulled this over. You know, I think in hindsight, you know, when I look back at my addiction, and when I think about myself being, you know, in it, you know, I think about this just like this tangled knot of erroneous belief that was inside of me, that I could not be myself without drugs. You know, I could not, um, that they did something for me that I was not able to do for myself or find in healthy ways. And I think because that knot of belief was just so tight and a part of me, I think there's very little somebody technically could have said at that time that was just like one thing, you know. The flip side to that is I also don't think that you can do very wrong, you know, with saying the wrong thing. Because it's like, I think, you know, zooming back out, I think in a bit woo, I guess, but like approaching this stuff with love and openness, opposed to, you know, kind of that shaming, or like telling people how much they're hurting themselves and other people. I again can only speak for myself, but I, they know, you know, they
Yeah.
know. I knew, and if somebody said, "Oh, you're hurting yourself and you're hurting me," it would just, I would feel that in a resonant way because I knew it. And that's almost can be a tragic part about addiction that can make it so much harder, is it's like, you know that, but I can't, you know it, but you can't stop, you know,
Yeah.
and that is just, yeah, such a challenging thing. But for the people who are you know, trying to help or not, I think that I don't know, it's such a tough thing. I think that people who are in addiction, and you know, I've seen it from the other side too, you know, when I got my stuff together and still had people I loved struggling with it, it's the most helpless feeling in the world to be a person on the outside looking in. And having been there myself, like it it needs to take that person being willing to, you know, look at their stuff. And I think they can be guided in ways by, you know, people around them, or, you know, professional help and all of this, for sure, you know, to realize, oh, I'm holding this belief that is actually, you know, not serving me and not helping me, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, as far as like being able to say the right or wrong thing, I don't know. I do think what I know, like the reason I'm like so confidently saying, you know, in this podcast, even that I know I wouldn't turn to drugs or alcohol, it's because I have untangled that belief within myself, and I know that they don't do anything for me. Like there's nothing they can do for me, even as a band-aid solution is not a viable option. So I think had I believed that before I got to the point where I started feeling like, oh, maybe this is something that works for me, then maybe I wouldn't have gone there. But I think that's where, you know, we talk about addiction on a societal level, where it is so complicated. And I do think a lot of this stuff has to start earlier, and in nurturing people to, you know, feel empowered within themselves to deal with the crap life will throw at them. And I think that's the key.
I'm curious, and again, this might be kind of a dumb question, but is addiction, do you think, more emotional or physical?
Ooh. See, I mean, it can be both, but I consider it way more emotional. I consider it way more emotional. And I mean, in some ways, emotional is physical. Sometimes the things that you know, what we feel in our bodies, on a somatic level is actually related to our emotions. But yeah, like I mean, this isn't in the book, but I quit smoking quite a bit, it's like cigarette smoking quite a bit late after I quit drugs and drinking. And, you know, the way I quit smoking was reading Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, uh-uh.
So interestingly, I was a heavy smoker, smoked a pack a day, was still trying to be a runner, which was weird, but my journey. But I read this book and it really just it unpacks the psychological connection that we have to smoking. And it kind of, you're allowed to smoke cigarettes while you read the book, so that's what I did. And as I'm reading it, it talks about, you see these movies where a soldier's about to die and their last request is to have a cigarette, and it feels so good. And it kind of just undoes all that by explaining nicotine is technically not as addictive as we think it is. The anti-smoking industry actually perpetuates the physical connection to nicotine by, oh, if you quit, you better chew this gum, or you better put this patch on, or you better do all of these things. But once I read this book, and it kind of just undid all of those strongly held beliefs in my brain, which I now know to be true. I remember sitting there having my last cigarette, smoking about half of it, realizing that it was the most ridiculous thing in the world that I was smoking this cigarette, because similar to drugs, it wasn't doing anything for me. I put it out. I did not have physical withdrawals from it. I did not have,
Wow.
I had tried quitting before, tried all the things, and then was so desperate to go back, I went back. This time, there was none of that. I just quit. And then all of a sudden, I was just a non smoker. And yeah, that said, I do want to disclaim, would not apply this to, say, heroin addiction or any sort of physical withdrawal. I mean, I've personally felt opioid withdrawal and it's horrific. That said, I think that there is this psychological mind body connection. And also I think the physical is easier and a manifestation of the emotional, because to answer your question in the most long-winded way ever, addiction is emotional for sure, based on my experience.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you for that answer, though. You talked a little bit about that shame you felt, and I just wondered now, have you made peace with the girl you were back then? Have you
Mhm.
given her grace?
I have. I've given her, yeah, I've given her so much grace. Send her so much love. And I read my book recently, obviously. But and I'm like, damn, you're strong. You all so many things were just like hard for you, and you made so many things harder for yourself in so many different frustrating ways. And it's just like I see that and smile at it and feel sad about it in some ways, but I'm also like, you had freaking grit. Like, you had so much grit, and you were so resourceful. Like, you were so misguided in so
Mhm,
many ways. You misguided yourself in so many ways, but you were so resourceful, and you were so committed to honestly finding a sense of peace. And it was not an easy road or an easy journey, but I am proud of her for trying. I do, I like I said, these days, sometimes I still have my days, but I do not look back on her and shame her in any way. Even though, that said, sometimes I will read excerpts of my book and just be like, oh, this is so embarrassing. Like, oh, why did I write that in a book? For sure. But I think that's inevitable. I think that's the cost of vulnerability. So
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage. That's my podcast partner, Tara, and I, we talk about this often about people who write memoirs and they are completely transparent. We're like, how do they do that? Like the amount of courage that it takes to put that on paper for the world to read and judge in many ways, right? We don't know how you all do it, but we're thankful that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, honestly, like, oh, it's one thing that has been is amazingly illuminating is that it was worse in the anticipation of it. You know, I like before my book came out, I was just like I've shared this before in other places where a couple weeks before I'm like had this moment. I'm like, why didn't anybody stop me? Why did I do this? Like, this is the dumbest thing and just like had just was freaking out about it in certain ways for sure. But then it's like the book went out there, I've gotten some just amazing responses and feedback from people. And also even the, less amazing, which is, fine. It's almost like this is the thing that I needed to do and I did it. And I think I anticipated things being a lot more challenging, or like, am I just going to need to like go into exile now and not talk to or see anybody ever again? And I just don't feel like that at all, which is
Yeah.
that's a big lesson actually in anxiety, I think.
Yeah. I love that. In one of the book reviews that you've linked to on your website, it includes your memoir as something that should be adapted into a movie or TV show, which I loved seeing that. And then I wondered, have you thought about who you'd like to have play you in a movie?
I mean, I have not thought about it in this prior, just in the sense that I like to create as much distance between the character of me and myself, but I have considered it, and it's a tough thing. I don't know, like I don't follow like movie pop, so I'm like
Yeah.
I don't know, like um Thora Birch, or like, I'm like, who is it popular in the 90s? I'm like, I think they're probably everybody that I could think of is probably all too old now. And all the young
Yeah.
people, I don't know the name.
Yeah.
Like Brie Larson, maybe, somebody who has that, I don't know, ability to, or the indie vibe and the ability to well, I don't know. It's a tough question. I haven't thought deeply about it.
Well, I'm the same way because I'm not really, I don't watch movies and I don't know who all the younger people are, but I was thinking about it just in terms of I think it should be an actress that, like you say, is an indie actress that the whole world doesn't know, so there's no baggage there, but that she comes to the role and she just inhabits your character. I just think that's who it should be. But
Yes, I agree. That's exactly who it should be. 100% agree.
my last question for you is, are you working on anything new that we can hopefully see in the future?
Ooh, I am. So I am retiring my memoir practice. I I mean, I don't. I'm writing fiction, started working on a book, very early stages, and it's all sort of just materializing in certain ways right now. So I don't have too much to say about that, but definitely writing another book. It's definitely going to be fiction, and I'm very excited and engaged with it.
Well, Erin, thank you so much because I will definitely be reading it when it comes out, and I'd love to have you come back. But I think, yeah, as a fiction writer, again, yeah, I hadn't thought about it this way, but your memoir does kind of read like fiction. So I'm really excited to read whatever comes out next. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Awesome. This has been so wonderful. So appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.